In this video, I'm going to be giving you 50 tips for when you're training your arms in just 18 minutes. These tips can help you to get more out of your training and help you to get bigger arms. First, we're going to be going over all the tips for when you're training your biceps. Second section will cover your triceps. Third will be forearms. Fourth is going to be the brachialis muscle, and then fifth is just some general tips when you're training your arms. So just before we get started, my name's Charlie. I'm a bodybuilder, BJJ fighter, level 3 personal trainer with over 7 years experience in the fitness industry, and I've helped many clients gain muscle, build strength and lose weight. If you're interested in doing any of that, just check the links in the description. So tip 1 is for when you're training back and biceps together, like you're doing a pull workout for example. If you really want to focus on your biceps, try and do most of the bicep exercises before your back exercises, as obviously you have the most energy towards the beginning of your workout, and therefore will be able to do a bit more when you're training your biceps and doing them exercises. For example, you might be able to lift a little bit of extra weight or just do a few extra reps. Tip 2 is that biceps generally require a lot of volume and intensity to grow. Bearing this in mind, you may want to train slightly closer to failure when you're training biceps. You may want to do a few extra sets, more than you would for other muscles. Tip 3 is to supinate, which is essentially taking your hands from facing down to facing up when you're doing any sort of curl movement where applicable. It's only really going to be for when you're doing dumbbell curls, as your wrists will be able to freely move. But your bicep has 3 functions. One is to bend your arm, obviously. Second is to do this twisting motion. And then third is also very slightly involved in lifting your arm. So if you're doing that twisting motion while also bending your arm, you're getting 2 of the functions done at the same time. Tip 4 is that when you are doing that twisting motion, try if you can to grip the dumbbell with an offset grip as shown in this video. Where instead of gripping it in the middle, your thumb will be slightly closer towards the end of the dumbbell. What this is going to do is it's going to disperse more of the weight towards your pinky side of your hand, and therefore meaning you're actually going to be lifting more of the actual weight of the dumbbell when you're doing that twisting movement. Tip 5 is that it's alright to slightly lift your elbows up in front of you when you're doing any sort of curl movement. If you're doing any sort of curl and you are doing that movement of lifting your elbows up, it is still fine, it will still work your bicep fine, and it will actually allow you to get a bit of a stronger contraction, so it can actually be quite a good thing. Tip 6 is that if you have any sort of wrist pains or aches or just hurts your wrist when you're doing any sort of curl, try and do curls with an easy bar. Just going to put your hands in a bit more of a comfortable position, as it'll be sort of between facing up and facing in. So most people find it a bit safer on their wrist or feel a bit more comfortable. Tip 7, it is alright to do cheat curls every now and then. Cheat curls are essentially where you cheat the weight up by slightly swinging it, and then you control it down with strict, safe technique. The reason for doing it is that your muscles will be stronger on that lowering part compared to the actual lifting part. Tip 8, if you feel like you excessively swing too much when you're doing any sort of curl movement, try and do the curls against the wall with your head, hips and shoulders against the wall. What this is going to do is it's going to just ensure that you can't swing, as your back will be, as I said, in that straight position. Tip 9, biceps in most cases, especially for beginners, are quite hard to actually feel when you're doing the actual curling movement or when you're just squeezing them. So you want to try and improve your mind-muscle connection, which is essentially your ability to actually squeeze the muscle and actually feel it. So to do this, what you want to do is put your bicep in a peak contracted position, so bending your arm as much as possible, twisting your wrist as much as possible, and also slightly lifting your elbows up. And then when you are in that position at the top of the curl, squeeze your biceps as hard as you can for 1 or 2 seconds, just feel a proper squeeze in them. Tip 10, try and experiment with curls where your elbows are behind your body. What this will do is it will put more of a stretch on the long head of your biceps, and the stretch can be beneficial when you're training to build muscle. Okay, just before we carry on with the tips, I'd just like to make you aware of an email campaign that's going to be coming up soon. So it's completely free, and essentially what it will be is for 31 days, there'll be daily fitness tips sent by email. And these tips are going to completely transform your fitness journey. And it will literally cover everything from the training, recovery, things to do supplements, eating, everything you need to know to make this next year in fitness your best year you've ever had. So I'll be starting on the 1st of January 2026. If you're watching this months in the future now, you can still sign up for it and it will still just give you the tips, but just starting from the day that you actually do sign up. So I'm moving on to tip 11, which is when you're doing any sort of preacher curl on a bench, try if you can to have an incline a bit lower. What this will do is it will just mean that there's more tension on your bicep when it's stretched, as if the incline was too steep, it would be more similar to a standing curl when there's no tension on your bicep at the bottom. Whereas if you were to do it on a very low incline, there will be quite a lot of tension on your bicep when it's in that stretch position. Tip 12 is to doing a grip that you use when you're doing any sort of barbell curl. Anything where you're bending your arm will work both the heads of your bicep. However, if you were to take quite a wider grip, it will work more of your short head of your bicep, which is on the inside, Whereas if you were to have more of a narrow grip, it'll work the long head of your bicep, which is more on the outside. So it would only be a very slight difference, but if you really want to focus on one bit of your bicep compared to the other, it's something that you can change. Tip 13, when you're doing any sort of rowing movement or pulling movement, your biceps will be worked in the most when you're gripping with an underhand grip. Tip 14, when you're doing any sort of curl and you're at like the end point of the curl, try and make sure you squeeze your triceps at the bottom. What this will do is it will just ensure that your arms are fully straight and that you're going for full range of motion, as you want to avoid like coming sort of 3/4 or 2/3 of the way down and then coming back up. So to ensure that you get full range of motion, just try and squeeze your triceps at the bottom to ensure that your arms go into a fully straight position. Tip 15 is that it's fine to raise your elbows when you're doing any sort of like curling movement. As we've mentioned a little bit in a few other tips, your bicep is also used in bringing your arm up, so it will work your bicep a little bit more. And you can also do it to help you do like a cheat curl, as what we mentioned previously. You can cheat the weight up slightly as long as you are controlling it down. So if you feel like you're getting towards the end of your set on curls and you can't do them with 100% strict technique, it is fine from the last few reps to like use your elbows, swing them up in front of you to get that better contraction and also to allow you to do a few more reps at the end of your set. Tip 16 is not necessarily when you're training biceps, but it is how to avoid like a bicep injury that's quite common. So that's when you're doing this switch grip on the deadlifts where you have one hand facing over and one hand facing under. If you are going to do that grip, just ensure that you keep your arms straight the entire time and don't be tempted at all to try and curl the weight up at any point, as it will be too heavy for you to even move with the curl, and if you do attempt it, there is a risk of you tearing your biceps. So just ensure that you keep your arms straight when you're doing that deadlift movement. Tip 17, when you're doing preacher curls, just make sure you're warmed up properly before you do them. Try and do them more towards the end of your workouts and try and stick to slightly lighter weights for higher reps when you are doing them. This is just because it will put your bicep in quite a stretched position and put quite a bit of tension on it. I'm sure you've probably seen videos of people like tearing their biceps on the preacher curl. So it does have that very slight risk, but to minimize it and avoid you getting injured when you're doing the preacher curl, doing those 3 things that I mentioned, obviously make sure you're warmed up properly. Try and do it more towards the end of your workout, as you'll also be like the most warm towards the end of your workout, and you'll also be like a little bit fatigued. You won't be able to lift like as much weight, therefore it won't be as dangerous for your biceps. And also try and stick to slightly lower weights for higher reps, just to reduce the chance of getting injured at all. Tip 18, when you're doing preacher curls on a bench, if you're doing them one arm at a time, what you can do is use your arm that's not lifting the weight to help you assist your working arm to actually be able to lift the weight up, and then from there control it down with your arm that you was originally using. What this will do is it will just allow you to get a few extra reps beyond failure when you're doing a preacher curl, although it will only really be for advanced lifters. Tip 19, a variation you can try when doing a curl with an easy bar is to flip the bar upside down and then grip it as shown in this video. What this will do is it will put your biceps in a really supinated position, and therefore help you to feel like a better contraction of them. Tip 20, when you're doing any sort of like seated curl, when you're like sitting on the bench and doing curls with a dumbbell, try if you can to have this incline of the seat quite low, as if you just put your arms a bit more behind you when you're doing the curl movement, and therefore place a greater stretch on them. That's going to conclude all the tips for biceps. Next, we're going to be going on to tips when you're training your triceps. Tip 21 is going to be when you're doing any sort of pressing movement and you want to focus on your triceps the most, you try and use quite a closer grip. If you have that narrower grip, it's going to result in your arms going into more of like a bent position, and therefore allow your triceps to go through more of a range of motion, and we'll use them a little bit more. So if you are looking to build your triceps up, try doing any pressing movement with a closer grip. Tip 22, when you're doing any sort of tricep exercise or any movement pretty much where you're going to be straightening your arms, the best grip possible will be gripping with a neutral grip. This is because if you were to grip with an overhand grip, it is a strong grip. You may feel now that your elbows are tempted to like flare out a bit, which can put more of an attention onto your shoulders as opposed to your triceps. Whereas if you were to grip with an underhand grip, it will keep your elbows in close together, but it's not quite a strong grip. So what you might find is that when you do go quite heavy, you can't hold on to it properly with that underhand grip. So to get the best of both worlds, try gripping with a neutral grip, as it is a strong grip, and it will also help reinforce your elbows being like in together. Tip 23 is to pretty much in all cases try and avoid tricep kickbacks, as they only allow your triceps to go through about half the range of motion. They won't put any stretch in your triceps at all, and they're a lot of better alternatives. So yeah, if you are doing tricep kickbacks, try and swap them for pretty much any other tricep exercise. Tip 24 is that when you're doing any sort of tricep exercise, try and have it set up so that when your arms are in a fully bent position, the cable and your forearm form like a 90-degree angle. For example, if you were to be doing tricep push downs and you're standing too far away, what you'll find is that when your arms go in that bent position, there'll be more like your forearms and the cable sort of form a straight line. Whereas if you were to be standing closer to the cable, it'll be more similar to like a 90-degree angle, therefore keeping more of the tension on your triceps when they're in that stretch point. Tip 25, when you're doing dips and you want to try and work your triceps a bit more, try to doing them more upright. Tip 26, as a general rule, when you are doing any sort of tricep exercise, try and keep your elbows pretty much still. So whether that be like a tricep push down or like an overhead tricep extension, any isolation movement for your triceps, try and keep your elbows where they are, as this will just ensure most of the tension goes onto your triceps and it doesn't go to any other working muscles. Tip 27, when you're doing any sort of tricep isolation movement, try and have your arm in like an elevated position where it's like above your head, as opposed to when it's down at your side. As your tricep mainly just straightens your arm, but it's also involved in you bringing your arm back behind your body. So if you do the opposite of that and have it up like high above you, it'll place more of a stretch on it, especially in that long head of your triceps. Tip 28, however, if you are a beginner or you just struggle to feel your triceps, you probably want to stick to exercises where your elbows are at your side, as this will put your tricep in a more of a contracted position, which will be better if you're looking to develop that mind-muscle connection. Tip 29 is that when you're programming your workouts, try not to count things like bench press or shoulder press as tricep exercises. They'll mainly work other muscles and the triceps will only be like a secondary muscle. So unless you're a complete beginner, the stimulus that it does to your triceps in that case won't generally be enough for them to actually grow. Only really count your exercises where you're going to be isolating your tricep. Tip 30, when you're doing skull crushers with dumbbells, just ensure that you're bringing your hands down to the side of your head and that you never actually do bring them down to your head at all, as if you were to fail in a rep, obviously you can get injured doing it that way. And then tip 31 is going to be when you're doing any sort of tricep isolation movement, try and make sure that you're bending your arms as much as possible, as this will make sure your tricep goes to the most range of motion and also ensuring it gets into the most stretched position. Tip 32 is to try and avoid flaring your elbows out when you're doing any sort of tricep dip movement, as this can put your shoulders in quite like an awkward position and it can lead to like shoulder pains and shoulder problems. So what you want to do instead is, instead of having your hands facing forward, have your hands facing out to the side, as this will just help to reinforce your elbows being in closer together, therefore put your shoulders in a safer position. And then tip 33 is that you're going to be stronger generally when you're doing any sort of tricep push down movement as opposed to any sort of overhead tricep exercise. Tip 34, doing push downs with a bar has been shown to very slightly use more of the lateral head of your tricep, which is essentially like the outside bit of your tricep. In tip 35, when you're doing the push downs with a rope, it has been shown to very slightly do more of the medial head of your tricep, which is more like from the inside bit of your tricep. As I said, these changes will only be very slight, but if you would like to focus on more of the outside of your triceps or on the inside of your triceps, it is something you can experiment with. Tip 36, your triceps have been shown to be the most type 2 dominant muscle out of any other muscle in your body. So knowing this, you may want to do exercises with slightly heavier weights for lower reps, as they are very type 2 dominant, therefore may respond a bit better to these slightly heavier weights for lower reps. Tip 37, when you're doing skull crushers, lying down on the bench, try if you can to let your elbows come back behind your head as much as you can, as opposed to having them fixed in that position straight above your body. As if you're allowing them to come back more, it will put more of a stretch on the long head of your triceps. Tip 38, similar to what we said on the biceps one, the first point, doing your bicep exercises before you do your back exercises. If you're training chest and triceps together and you really want to focus on building up your triceps and they're your focus, try and do most of your tricep exercises before you do your chest exercises. And the next few tips are going to be all to do with forearm exercises and how to get the most out of them. Tip 39 is that when you're doing pretty much any exercise where you have to actually hold on to the bar, try where you can to do them without using lifting straps, as these will improve your grip. It will allow you to lift more weight. But if you really want to focus on building your forearms up and build the strength in them, try as much as you can to do them exercises without using the straps, and only use them when your grip does become the limiting factor. Tip 40 is to avoid curling your wrists at the end when you're doing the barbell curl movement, as the weight that you use for the barbell curl for your biceps will be a bit too much for when you're actually doing the wrist curl movement, therefore can put a bit of too much stress on your wrist if you were to curl it at the end using that weight. Tip 41 is to try reverse curls, and these are essentially a normal curl, but instead of your palms facing up, your palms will face down. It's one of the best exercises for building the back of your forearms. Tip 42 is that although your forearms will be worked in quite a lot of movements where you have to actually hold on to the weight, they'll only be trained isometrically, meaning they'll be used to actually holding the weight, but your forearms won't go through any sort of like lengthening, contracting. So if you do want to build your forearms up, you want to include exercises where you're actually like moving your wrists and actually like working your forearms as opposed to just working them isometrically. Tip 43, it's generally going to be better to do any sort of wrist curl movement where you're sitting down and your forearms are resting on your legs as opposed to doing the curl standing, as doing them in the sitting position where your forearms are resting on your legs will allow your wrists to go through more of a range of motion, therefore place more of a stretch on your forearms, and will just be better when you're looking to actually grow them. And then the next few tips are going to be to do with when you're training your brachialis muscle, which is essentially the muscle sort of between your biceps and triceps. So tip 44 is that the function of your brachialis is to bend your arms. However, if you want to focus on your brachialis the most, you want to do curls where you're doing a neutral grip, like hammer curls, where instead of your palms facing up or facing down, they'll face together. Tip 45, a cool variation you can try when you're doing the hammer curls is to do a cross-body hammer curl, where instead of just bringing the dumbbells up in front of you, you are doing them so you're coming across your body when you're doing that curling movement. Tip 46, when you're doing any sort of back exercise and you want to focus on your brachialis, try and do it with a neutral grip, so very similar to the biceps. When you're doing an underhand grip, it'll work your biceps. When you're doing that neutral grip in any sort of pulling movement, like a lat pull down or a roll or anything like that, it'll work your brachialis the most. And now we're going to be finishing up with just some general tips when you're training your arms that you can apply to pretty much any part of your arm. Tip 47 is that very similar to like on a bench press or the squat or the deadlift, you want to get stronger on them very slowly over time. Exact same thing applies to when you're training your arms. You want to make sure you're getting stronger on your arm exercises over time. So it won't be nearly as fast as their main compound movements, but you still want to make sure that maybe like every few months you are progressing, you're adding like a few pounds or a few kilos to what you're actually lifting, just ensuring that you're progressively overloading and that you're actually making progress. Tip 48 is to go by the feel of the movement when you're doing any sort of arm exercise. If you find that you feel concentration curls, for example, a lot in your biceps, and you don't feel barbell curls at all, you want to try and stick to the concentration curls. So pretty much sticking to the exercise that you feel the most. Tip 49 is to try and incorporate an arm day if your arms are an area that you really want to focus on. So for example, you could do like chest and back together, you could do like legs and shoulders together, and then you can just have a day specifically where you really focus on arms and you can just give it 100% for them. Tip 50, if you find when you're doing any sort of arm exercise, so anything where you're bending your arm or straightening your arm, if you feel like your wrists are quite weak or your wrists limit how much you can actually lift, to try and use wrist wraps as it will help to keep your wrists straighter. It'll help to reduce any sort of pains you have and will also help to keep your wrist joint more stable. So that is going to conclude all 50 tips. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and like. As I mentioned at the beginning, there'll be links in the description to online personal training which I offer, as well as other services from my website. If anything that does interest you, make sure to check the links in the description. If you'd like to focus a bit more on training your arms and learn a bit more, click the video about here, where it will be a full guide to when you're training your triceps, so I'll be going more detail into that. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.